They didn't have doors. No locks, no fences, no alarms. Just shadows, heavy silence, and the knowledge that something out there, bigger, faster, hungrier, was watching. Imagine the sun slipping below the prehistoric horizon. A Neanderthal family crouches in a cave, the air thick with the smell of smoke and unwashed skin. Outside, the darkness becomes a second predator. Every sound, a twig snapping, a low growl, sends pulses of fear through the group. They grip spears, not for hunting, but for surviving the night. This was not peace. This was a nightly war. And yet somehow they lived, not by luck, but by strategy, invention, and a primal understanding of terror. Tonight, we uncover how our ancient ancestors defied extinction, night after night, because the story of what cavemen did in the dark is the story of how we're still here. Night in the Paleolithic world was not quiet. It breathed, it stalked, it watched. There were no cities spilling orange halos into the sky, no moonlit porch to stand beneath, sipping safety like tea. When the sun bled into the horizon, early humans didn't admire the sunset. They braced for what followed. The world after dusk was a different planet. A planet ruled not by humans, but by fangs, claws, and instincts older than language. Imagine it. A stretch of forest under a thick, ancient sky. No stars yet, only the faint residue of twilight. A group of early Homo sapiens, barely distinguishable from modern humans in face and form, move silently. They travel in small bands. Their feet press into wet soil. Every crack of a twig sounds like a gunshot in the stillness. They are looking not for food now, but shelter, somewhere with cover, somewhere defensible. Because in the next hour, the trees will no longer be trees. They'll become silhouettes. The wind will start to whisper wrong. And something out there, something older, heavier, hungrier, will begin to move. The night was not an empty canvas. It was crowded. Hyenas with bone-crushing jaws patrolled the savannas. Saber-toothed cats, strong enough to drag a man into the underbrush silently, hunted in tall grass. There were snakes coiled in trees, owls with silent wings, and in colder climates, cave lions whose eyes reflected firelight like mirrors. And then, of course, there were others like us. Rival bands, desperate, territorial, human enough to plan but wild enough to kill without warning. This was not imagination. Fossilized skeletons bear the signatures of these predators. Puncture wounds to the skull, claw marks on ribs, crushed pelvises. In one Neanderthal site in France, researchers found the remains of children clustered in a cave with evidence of animal scavenging, and what might have been a sudden collapse, a desperate retreat from something outside. Every footprint preserved in ancient sediment is a shadow of a decision: run or stay, hide or fight. To understand what night meant for our ancestors, we have to momentarily let go of everything modern. Strip away the walls, the locks, the knowledge that rescue is ever coming. Nightfall wasn't a time to rest. It was a test of readiness, every single day. It came like a wave of dread, predictable yet always new. Our physiology remembers. The fear of the dark is not a childish invention. It is an evolutionary inheritance. Studies show that modern humans are biologically wired to be more alert in low light. Cortisol levels rise slightly at night. Heart rate subtly quickens. Our pupils dilate wider than we need. Even today, people in remote areas where predators still exist report higher rates of insomnia. That rustling in the bush, a trick of the wind to you. But to a Paleolithic mind, it was the drumbeat of death. Our ancestors didn't have the luxury of disbelief. And so their biology began to change with their behavior. Circadian rhythms, the internal clock that tells us when to sleep, adapted over generations not just to follow the sun, but to align with survival itself. Early hominins likely slept lighter, in shorter bouts and in groups. When danger can emerge at any moment, deep sleep becomes a liability. Over time, natural selection may have favored those who could wake quickly, hear well in the dark, and sleep lightly enough to catch the footfall of something circling the camp. Even the choice of where to sleep, where to make camp, was part of the strategy. Our species didn't always choose comfort. They chose elevation, vantage points, natural chokeholds. A high ledge wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a fortress with gravity as a gatekeeper. Caves with narrow entrances offered a barrier against large predators. Dense underbrush could be arranged as early warning tripwires. In this world, vulnerability was a blueprint for innovation. But the most powerful defense wasn't physical, it was social. No one faced the night alone. The human brain, especially in its early development, evolved in community. Alone, we are fragile, but together we are a storm of signals, ears, and eyes. A huddle of bodies meant pooled senses. A scream from one could wake many. A shared fire offered not just light, but a circle of awareness. In fact, scientists have found that in most hunter-gatherer societies, sleep is staggered naturally throughout the night. Someone is always awake, not by rule, but by nature. Even today, tribes like the Hadza of Tanzania exhibit this phenomenon. Among them, the night is never entirely silent. One child rustles in their sleep, an elder pokes at the fire, a mother rocks her infant. Sleep is a communal rhythm, not a solo journey. This rhythm, millions of years old, may have been humanity's first alarm system. Then there's the emotional landscape of the night. Imagine a child in a prehistoric group hearing wolves howling in the distance. They don't know the sound, but they see the adults tense. They hear whispers, notice the sudden hush, the tightening of hands around spears. Fear becomes infectious, an unspoken language passed from one heartbeat to another. And over time, that child will learn what sounds mean danger, what shadows to avoid, what silences are too quiet. These moments shaped more than survival. They shaped culture, memory, and identity. Because the night didn't just provoke fear, it demanded stories. And so, after all precautions were taken, after the perimeter was checked, the fire stirred, the guards chosen, there came a sacred moment when the group sat down, and someone, perhaps the oldest among them, began to speak. Not to entertain, but to warn, to teach, to imprint. Long ago, they might begin, the fire went out too early, and the cave cat came. Or never sleep under the black tree. That's where the shadows walk. These stories, wrapped in superstition and myth, weren't random. They were oral instruction manuals encoded in fear and metaphor. They turned survival data into memory, memories passed from fire to fire, generation to generation. Long before writing, long before science, this was how humanity protected itself from the night, with vigilance, with instinct, and with imagination. And in this fragile balance between real danger and remembered fear, a new kind of intelligence began to form. An intelligence that could anticipate, that could plan, that could warn others. This was the dawn of strategy, not brute strength but shared thinking. The Paleolithic night, then, was more than a span of hours. It was a forge shaping our species in darkness, by the light of flickering flame and the shadows of teeth. It honed our senses, sculpted our minds, and pulled us inward to each other. And it asked a question that echoed through millennia. How do you survive when the world turns against you? Our ancestors answered not with fear alone, but with cooperation, caution, and creativity. And as we step deeper into their world, we begin to see that survival was never passive. It was an active art, painted each night in embers, in whispered warnings, and in the quiet footsteps of those who dared to sleep in a world that never promised safety. Next, we'll follow those footsteps into the shadows of the Earth's oldest homes, where walls of stone became shields and caves became cathedrals of survival. Because shelter was not merely a place to rest, it was the first human fortress. We descend now into the places where they waited for the dark to pass. When you think of a fortress, you might picture stone walls, battlements, moats. But long before kingdoms rose from the earth, before blueprints, before steel, our ancestors were already building strongholds. Their materials weren't quarried, they were found, and their blueprints were drawn in instinct, not ink. Because in a world without locks, where the night could swallow you whole, survival meant reading the land like a living map. The first true shelters weren't just places to sleep. They were natural strongholds, chosen with the precision of a military scout. They had to be. Lives depended on it. We begin in Bruniquel Cave, southern France. Deep beneath a limestone ridge lies one of the most mysterious structures ever discovered from the Paleolithic era. Around 176,000 years ago, yes, hundreds of millennia before cities, Neanderthals ventured nearly 1,000 feet into the earth. There, in the ink-black dark, they built something astonishing: circular rings of broken stalagmites, carefully arranged in geometric patterns. No one knows their exact purpose. But the presence of fire-blackened stone, scorch marks, and deliberate construction leaves little doubt. This was no accidental hideout. This was a space made to be held. Why so deep underground? Because the further in you go, the more insulated you are, not just from weather, but from predators. Saber-tooths won't chase you through a winding maze of rock. Wolves hesitate when visibility vanishes. Inside, sound is muffled. Sight is yours alone. One person standing at the only narrow entrance can see, hear, and defend. It's no coincidence. Bruniquel wasn't just shelter. It was early defense strategy in architectural form. Then there's Blombo's cave, carved into a cliff along South Africa's southern coast. Around 100,000 years ago, early Homo sapiens occupied this cave intermittently, using it not just for safety, but for culture. Ochre processing kits, engraved bones, shell beads, all suggesting that once a place became secure, the mind was free to create. But Blombos, too, tells a tactical story. It sits more than 100 feet above sea level. From the mouth of the cave, early humans could see for miles, over plains, dunes, and ocean. It was elevation as insurance. An approaching threat could be spotted long before it reached the entrance. And if danger did come, you had the high ground, you had the bottleneck, you had the terrain. Across continents, the same patterns appear. The Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, once home to not just Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, but a third, now extinct lineage called the Denisovans, lies in a valley surrounded by forest and snow. Again, the cave's entrance is limited, the interior deep, and the position remote. It offered concealment, refuge, and a view of the valley floor, not unlike a medieval castle built into the rock, except this one was occupied 200,000 years before castles even existed. And these weren't just lucky picks. Evidence suggests that early humans actively chose locations based on tactical value. Caves with narrow entrances reduced the risk of large predators entering. Higher elevations improved surveillance. Shelters facing open plains made it harder for enemies, human or otherwise, to approach unseen. Some groups even preferred overhangs or shallow depressions with built-up brush and stone at the perimeter, creating artificial choke points, makeshift walls before walls were a concept. We often think of our ancestors as wandering aimlessly across a prehistoric wilderness, but in truth, they were reading that wilderness like an engineer studies terrain. Every cliffside, every ravine, every outcrop offered different strategic benefits. They weren't just surviving nature, they were using it. And they didn't stop at what the land gave them. In several Paleolithic sites, archaeologists have found evidence of modified entrances, piles of stones arranged deliberately near cave mouths, almost like primitive doorways. These weren't just debris. Some were stacked, others placed with purpose, suggesting a rudimentary understanding of obstruction, of creating barriers to slow or trap whatever might try to come through. Imagine it, night falls, you're inside the cave. The fire crackles, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Near the entrance, heavy rocks are rolled into place, not to seal you in, but to funnel anything trying to get in. Maybe someone sleeps near the edge, stone in hand, their ear trained to the rustle of brush. Maybe others take shifts. The cave becomes more than shelter, it becomes a system, a strategy. Even acoustics may have played a role. Some caves amplify certain sounds while dampening others. Researchers have found that in many Paleolithic sites, especially those used for ritual or group activity, areas with strong echoes or sound-carrying properties tend to be central. But acoustics aren't just for ceremony. They can also function as early warning systems. A shout in a narrow corridor bounces. A footstep echoes. In a world where darkness conceals everything, sound becomes your eyes. The best caves didn't just protect you from predators. They gave you sensory control over space. It's here, in this shadowy realm between architecture and instinct, that the idea of home begins to emerge, not as comfort but as control. Control over entry, control over sightlines, control over escape. And that control, in turn, created margin, the margin needed to think, to plan, to rest. Once danger was made manageable, even temporarily, early humans began to invest in the space itself, not just surviving in it, but shaping it. At the entrance of some caves, tools were cached. In others, there are signs of repeated use over centuries, suggesting that these places were known, revisited, perhaps even remembered. These weren't random stops. They were trusted strongholds, And like any fortress, they carried stories. This is where we waited out the great flood. This is where we hid from the clawed ones. This is where fire was kept alive. Fortress thinking in this way predates even farming. It predates villages, tribes, and temples. Before we built civilizations, we built places to hold the dark at bay. We looked for choke points, bottlenecks, cover, and sightlines. And in doing so, we laid the foundations, not of stone walls, but of human foresight itself. But not all danger came from claws and teeth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the night was another human. The next stage in the story of survival isn't about shelter, but about trust. How do you sleep when betrayal could come from inside your own circle? How do you build safety in numbers without sacrificing it to rivalry? In the next chapter, we enter the firelit ring of human bonds, how alliances were formed, how watch shifts were chosen, and how the earliest social contracts emerged from the pressure of night. Because even the best cave could not protect you from a whisper or a grudge. We've learned how early humans shaped the land. Now we explore how the land shaped us. It didn't begin as a blaze. It started with a flicker, timid, sputtering, born from the friction of stone or the lingering kiss of lightning. A single thread of flame catching dry grass, smoke curling into the night air. But in that fragile flame was the seed of revolution, not just for warmth or for light, but for power. Because fire, above all, was protection. In the chaos of the Paleolithic night, when predators ruled the silence and shadows, fire became humanity's first weapon of deterrence. Not a spear, not a trap, but a barrier of light, a signal that said, "This place is occupied, come no closer." At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, deep inside a cavern worn into the base of a plateau, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. Ash layers, burned bones, and charred plant remains embedded in sediment dating back over 1 million years. Here, early hominins, possibly Homo erectus, had not only used fire but had done so inside a cave. This wasn't accidental wildfire. This was contained combustion. A hearth, perhaps crude but unmistakably intentional. And from that moment forward, the dark would never belong entirely to the predators again. Because predators, unlike people, fear fire. The glow, the crackle, the shifting shadows confuse nocturnal hunters. Their eyes, adapted for darkness, recoil from flame. Their instincts, honed to stalk silently under moonlight, falter in its presence. A circle of fire is not just illumination, it's a wall. And within that wall, for the first time, early humans could do the unthinkable. They could relax. Not entirely, not carelessly. But for the first time in evolutionary memory, the night was not a guaranteed descent into fear. It became negotiable, defensible. That flickering ring of flame allowed early humans to step off the edge of vigilance, to breathe, to speak, to sleep. We see this transformation echoed in Kesem Cave, Israel. Dating back 400,000 years, the site contains a large, central hearth that was used repeatedly over time. Burned bones suggest meat was cooked. The area around the fire shows signs of long-term occupation, cut marks, stone tools, discarded food. It was not just a fire pit, it was a hub, a command center for life after sundown. Once fire was mastered, night changed completely. Before fire, darkness ended the day. It brought paralysis. After fire, night became opportunity. The hours once claimed by terror were now reallocated to planning, to bonding, to tool-making. Studies of bone tools and sharpened flints suggest that firelight extended the productivity of early humans far beyond what biology alone allowed. They crafted spears by the glow. They sharpened blades. They wove baskets and chewed plant fibers into cordage. And in the orange half-light, something else emerged: story. Imagine the scene. The cave mouth is sealed with rock and thorn. The fire crackles, feeding off dry branches gathered hours before. Its warmth battles the chill. Children huddle close, eyes wide. An elder, face furrowed with time and memory, gestures toward the dancing shadows on the wall. The story they tell might be of a lion slain, or of the mountain that walks at night, or the stars and the voices they speak in. To modern ears, this sounds like myth, but in truth, it was memory. Firelight made these stories visible. It gave them a stage. And more importantly, it gave humans a ritual, something that could be repeated, night after night, reinforcing knowledge, forging identity, and weaving social threads tighter with every retelling. There's a reason so many origin myths begin with fire. Because fire didn't just keep enemies away, it brought people together. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied the Jew/Honsi people of the Kalahari and found that daytime conversation tended to focus on the practical, food-weather disputes. But nighttime fire circle talk, that was different. It was imaginative, emotional, moral. Fire reshaped the kinds of conversations people had. It made room for reflection, for shared dreams, for social cohesion. And social cohesion was itself a survival tactic. The more bonded the group, the better it functioned under threat. When trust ran deep, when memory was shared, the night became less about individual fear and more about collective readiness. The fire became a symbol, not just of defense, but of belonging. But there's another, subtler power in fire: psychological control. Before fire, the night was unpredictable. You couldn't see beyond the tree line. You didn't know when the eyes watching you would lunge. But fire reintroduced predictability. It carved out a space where humans controlled the perimeter. That control rewired our stress response. It gave us something to focus on, something to tend. In modern terms, it was a grounding mechanism, something to anchor the brain when instinct screamed, "Run." This calming effect isn't speculative. In controlled studies, even modern humans show lower cortisol levels when exposed to the sound and sight of a crackling flame. Our bodies still recognize its rhythm. We are descendants of the firekeepers. And fire required work. It was not passive protection. It was a chore, a craft, a responsibility. Tinder had to be gathered. Flame had to be fed. Wood had to be dried, stored, rationed. Someone had to keep watch when the fire dwindled in the coldest hours. In many ways, the management of fire was the first communal job. And with that job came hierarchy, trust, roles, the beginnings of leadership. And eventually, borders. Because once fire was yours, the territory around it became yours too. Archaeological evidence shows that early human groups defended their fire sites. Clusters of camps appear spaced across plains, rarely overlapping. Control of fire became control of territory, and control of territory, especially at night, meant access to water, game, shelter. In other words, fire didn't just defend humans from predators, it made us competitors. The fire's glow was both a beacon and a warning. To rivals, we are here, we are organized, we are awake. To predators, this circle is death, and to each other, this is where the story continues. Because that's the final transformation fire brought. It turned the night from something survived into something lived. It became the canvas upon which humanity painted its first culture, its first ethics, its first echoes of art and thought, all beneath the canopy of stars, all within the fragile shield of a flame we learned to tame, but never stopped needing. But fire alone could not protect you if the wrong person sat beside it. Trust, like fire, had to be managed, guarded, stoked. In the next chapter, we step deeper into the human circle, not of flame, but of relationship. Because when your life depends on those beside you, every bond becomes a negotiation. Every sleeping body a potential risk or refuge. We've seen how humans conquered the dark with walls of stone and rings of flame. But now, we enter the most complex fortress of all, the tribe itself. The fire still burns, casting long shadows that stretch across the cave walls like moving spirits. Embers crackle softly. Most of the tribe lies curled beneath hides and blankets of grass, their breath slow and rhythmic. Children, elderly, mothers, all surrendered to the dark in the safety of flame. But not everyone sleeps. Outside, just beyond the glow, someone stands. Eyes trained on the horizon, ears tilted toward the wind, a sharpened spear in hand, muscles tight with purpose but silent. They are the night guard. Not a soldier, not a leader, but a sentinel, a human shaped by the oldest duty there is, to keep others safe while they rest. We often think of night watch as a modern idea, something born of armies or security shifts, floodlit prisons and CCTV screens. But long before civilization, long before cities, this role was already etched into the human rhythm. And remarkably, it still exists today. In the bushlands of Tanzania, the Hadza people, a modern hunter-gatherer group whose lifestyle echoes that of our Paleolithic ancestors, sleep under the open sky. No locks, no fences, but they are rarely, if ever, completely asleep. In a 2017 study published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B, researchers observed that among Hadza camps, someone was almost always awake during the night. Sleep patterns were naturally staggered. Some people turned early. Some stayed up late. Others woke in the dead hours. The result? Across more than 220 hours of recorded nights, there were only 18 minutes total when everyone in the camp was asleep at once. 18 minutes, over more than 9 days. That's not coincidence, that's evolution. Because for our ancestors, the dark was never empty. It was occupied by saber-tooths with jaws strong enough to crush bone, by hyenas bold enough to raid, by snakes, by spiders, and by other humans. In that world, even a single sleeping hour could be fatal. So humans adapted, not through constant wakefulness, but through distributed vigilance. We weren't built to sleep in shifts by whistle and order. We evolved to do it organically, like a murmuration of birds changing direction midair. Some would rest, others would listen. And that silent pact, unspoken, unformalized, was one of the earliest forms of communal protection. But even in those staggered patterns, someone had to step forward. Someone had to move to the edge of the circle, to become the eyes and ears of the group. Imagine that role. The air is cold, sound carries far. Every crack of a twig could be a porcupine or a predator. Your fire offers warmth but makes you visible. You must stay near but not too near, awake but quiet, alert but not panicked. You listen to the wind threading through trees, to distant footsteps, to breathing that shifts behind you in sleep. You know the difference between the chirp of a nightjar and the cough of a leopard, between silence that means safety and silence that means something is watching back. You're not just guarding against threats, you're reading the dark. Anthropologists believe this role was not randomly assigned. It may have been given to the young, whose hearing was sharpest, or to the experienced, elders too old for hunts but wise in the rhythms of danger, or perhaps to those with the natural gift of vigilance, individuals attuned to detail, to pattern, to the kind of awareness that could mean the difference between life and death. They may have armed themselves with more than spears. Torches, bundles of grass or resin-lit wood could be prepared and set aside, ready to ignite with a breath. Rocks piled near the fire could serve as alarms or weapons. The edge of the camp might be marked with brush or thorn, designed to rustle if passed through. But the most powerful weapon of the night guard was something we rarely think about: memory. They remembered the trail sounds of lions, the way owls fell silent before a kill, the tension in the air when something other, was moving through the dark. They weren't just watching, they were interpreting, pattern matching, preparing. And they didn't do it alone. Most likely, the guard was not a singular hero, but one role in a shared strategy. While one person watched, another might have been in lighter sleep, ready to wake at a whisper. Parents curled around infants. Hunters slept near weapons. Trust was not just emotional, it was tactical. The ability to sleep at all depended on the faith that someone was watching, and that someone else would act if things went wrong. This silent choreography is visible in the genetic fabric of our species. Humans are among the few mammals whose sleep is both deep and vulnerable. We lack the ability to sleep lightly for days like deer or gazelles, but we compensate through social sleep, bodies gathered, overlapping, sharing warmth and vigilance. This biological vulnerability may be precisely why our ancestors invested in the role of guardianship. It wasn't about bravery, it was about necessity. And the social implications were enormous. To guard others meant responsibility. It meant status. It may have even laid the groundwork for trust-based hierarchies. Not the loudest or strongest, but the most reliable became invaluable. The person who stayed awake when everyone else slept wasn't just protecting bodies, they were protecting hope. Because without the safety of sleep, a tribe couldn't function. Without sleep, there was no hunting, no memory consolidation, no healing, no dream. And without someone willing to sit in the cold, lonely hours and hold the silence, that sleep would never come. Even today, in our cities and bedrooms, echoes of this remain. Parents wake at the slightest stir of a child. Night shift workers clock in under fluorescent moons. Soldiers pace in towers. Security guards nod behind glass. The instinct is old. The role is ancient. The name may have changed, but the purpose is the same. To be the one who doesn't close their eyes, so that others can. As we move forward in our journey into prehistoric night, we begin to see how not just the physical, but the emotional architecture of survival was being laid: trust, duty, vigilance, and the long, slow creation of roles. But what happened when those roles began to fracture? When fear was not outside the cave, but within it? In the next chapter, we descend into the flickering, fragile world of sleep itself and explore what early humans dreamed, feared, and endured when their minds wandered into the deep unknown. Because if the night watch was the body's defense, dreams were the battleground of the soul. The wind hisses through the trees, brushing low grass like fingers. Beneath the stars, the world is restless. Somewhere nearby, something breathes, but it's not human. It's heavier, slower, closer to the ground, and it's not alone. The night in the Pleistocene wasn't just dark, it was crowded. Eyes glowed in the brush. Footsteps padded through the soil with almost perfect silence. This wasn't a world made for humans. It was a world built for predators. If you think modern humans live at the top of the food chain, you're right, but that's new. In the Paleolithic, we were prey. Let's start with the shadows that haunted the forest edge: saber-toothed cats. Not just mythic beasts from museum posters, these apex predators, like Smilodon fatalis, were real. Massive, muscular, and armed with teeth like daggers, they weren't built to chase. They were ambush hunters, silent, calculating. Waiting in tall grass or behind rock outcrops, they struck fast and close. A single bite to the neck could bring down prey twice their size. And they weren't the only ones hunting in the dark. Cave hyenas, larger and more robust than the ones we see today, roamed in packs. Their jaws could pulverize bones. There's fossil evidence of them cracking open femurs to suck the marrow dry. And they weren't afraid of humans. Archaeological sites show gnawed hominin bones, skulls crushed by repeated bites. These were not just scavengers. These were competitors, opponents, sometimes victors. Then came dire wolves, heavier and more muscular than modern gray wolves. They hunted in organized packs, communicating with howls and signals that pierced the darkness. When a human group was small, tired, or poorly armed, a wolf pack might test them, circle them, rush them. But not all dangers slithered on four legs. In the tropical zones, especially in parts of ancient Asia and Africa, giant constrictor snakes, like pythons exceeding 20 feet in length, may have posed serious threats. Slow-moving during the day but active hunters at night, they waited near water sources, striking with silent precision. A sleeping human, unaware and unmoving, was the perfect size. And yet, the most dangerous predator wasn't any of these. It was us. Because sometime deep in the Paleolithic, a terrible truth emerged. It wasn't just animals that stalked the night. It was other humans. The fossil record bears scars of this revelation. Skulls with puncture wounds not caused by claws but by spears. ribs shattered not by falls but by deliberate blows, cut marks on bones, sometimes healed, often not, telling stories of violence, ambush, and war. At the Shanidar Cave in Iraq, one Neanderthal skeleton, known as Shanidar III, was found with a deep wound in the ninth rib. For decades, scientists debated its cause. Eventually, forensic studies suggested it came from a projectile weapon, possibly a thrown spear. If that's true, it means this Neanderthal was attacked not by an animal but by another hominin. Perhaps a rival, perhaps a modern human. Because the Pleistocene wasn't just an age of survival, it was an age of competition. Resources were scarce, territory meant life or death, and caves, those precious shelters, weren't empty. Sometimes they were already occupied. So humans fought each other. Evidence from multiple sites, including the Jebel Sahaba cemetery in Sudan, shows entire groups perishing in apparent raids. The skeletons bear signs of arrow and spear wounds, many of them lethal. Some victims were children. This was no isolated event. It was pattern. And at night it was worse. Because night concealed movement, night muffled sound. It allowed raiders to approach in silence, using firelight against their targets. If you saw a flicker in the trees, was it a predator or an enemy tribe? The line blurred. And for early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, this threat wasn't just theoretical. There's growing evidence they may have encountered each other and fought. At Grotte du Renne in France and El Cedron in Spain, Neanderthal remains have been found with strange injuries, and in some cases, signs of cannibalism. Now, cannibalism in the Paleolithic was not always about aggression. It was sometimes ritual or desperation. But the possibility of interspecies conflict, of raids between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, is very real. We often romanticize these encounters. Two species, two intelligences, meeting across a fire-lit clearing, but reality was likely more brutal. Competition meant exclusion. The survival of one often came at the cost of the other. It's no wonder then that prehistoric humans were obsessed with boundaries. Not just physical ones like cave walls or firelight, but social ones. Who belongs? Who doesn't? Who shares the fire and who lurks just beyond it? And this paranoia wasn't delusion. It was experience. Imagine being a mother in the Paleolithic night. Your children sleep beside you. You hear a twig snap, too rhythmic for an animal, too quiet for a storm. You grab your weapon if you have one. Your pulse quickens. You stare into the dark and wonder, predator or person. The fear wasn't just of being eaten. It was of being overcome by those who knew how to hunt you just as well as you knew how to hunt them. This is what shaped us. The need to defend the group, the fear of the unknown other, the strategic use of terrain, fire, and guards, the invention of barriers, and tragically, the invention of violence. Because night in the Paleolithic wasn't a metaphor, it was a force, a living theater of threats. Some had fangs, some had hands. And it didn't just shape our sleep, it shaped our souls. But despite the terror, despite the predators, both animal and human, early humans did not flee the dark. They adapted. They studied it. They learned how to predict it, and perhaps most surprising of all, they even found ways to dream in it. In the next chapter, we journey into those dreams, not as metaphor but as archaeology, because the drawings on cave walls, they weren't just art. They were messages, visions from the night etched in stone, warnings, stories, and maybe spells. We descend now into the dreamscapes of prehistoric minds, where imagination was both a survival tool and a way to make sense of a world filled with things that wanted you dead. Sleep, to us, it's a quiet surrender, 8 hours sealed behind closed doors, phones silenced, alarms set. But to our ancestors, sleep was something very different. It was a negotiation, a fragile contract between the body's need for rest and the world's refusal to give it. Because in the Paleolithic night, sleep wasn't just vulnerable, it was dangerous. Imagine lying down in a cave. The fire is dim, the stones are cold. Around you, your group, maybe 6 or 10 people, begins to drift off. But no one sleeps too deeply. The wind outside stirs the grass and someone stirs with it. A cough in the dark triggers a dozen half-open eyes. Even in sleep, the body listens. This wasn't accidental, it was evolution. Modern science has uncovered something fascinating. Our sleep was never meant to be one unbroken block. In fact, across cultures, and even today in some non-industrial societies, humans exhibit something called segmented sleep. Two distinct phases, first sleep and second sleep, one before midnight, one after, and in between, a period of quiet wakefulness, maybe an hour, maybe two. During that midnight interval, people weren't panicking. They talked in hushed voices, tended to the fire, whispered stories or prayers, checked the perimeter, made sure nothing had crept in with the shadows. In many ways, this interruption was part of the design. In modern tribal societies like the Hadza in Tanzania, researchers have documented asynchronous sleep. In a single night, someone in the group is always awake. One study found that out of a sample of 33 Hadza individuals, there was only a 20-minute stretch during the entire night when everyone was asleep at the same time. Just 20 minutes. That's not coincidence. That's vigilance, distributed across the group like a shared blanket. Even today, our bodies bear the imprint of this ancient vigilance. Some of us are light sleepers, awakened by a floorboard creak or a dog barking 2 streets over. It's annoying in the modern world, but it might have saved your life 40,000 years ago. And then there's the biology of motherhood. Across cultures, across time, mothers wake faster and more frequently to the cries or stirrings of their children. Their sleep is lighter, more fragmented. This isn't just nurturing, it's neurological. The maternal brain is primed for defense, wired to react. A whimper in the night, instantly processed, not by thought but by instinct. That reflex likely dates back hundreds of thousands of years, when one missed sound could mean a child gone by morning. Even the layout of sleep tells us something. People didn't sleep spread out, they clustered. Bodies curled together, shoulder to shoulder, back to back. This wasn't just for warmth, it was for awareness. One person shifts, the others feel it. In darkness, touch became radar. And in that closeness, in that half-sleep state where minds drifted but ears stayed alert, something strange emerged, something modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand. Hypnagogia, the threshold between wakefulness and sleep, a space where the mind begins to dream but still reacts to the world. In that liminal state, ancient humans could have heard a twig break and imagined a predator. Sometimes it was real, sometimes not, but the body always prepared. It's no wonder then that so many of the oldest myths, the oldest gods, and the oldest fears come from the night, from dreams, from that place where sleep and survival intersect. Even REM sleep, the dream-rich phase that dominates the later part of the night, has a role here. Modern research shows that REM sleep is interrupted when we feel unsafe. It's replaced with lighter, more reactive stages where the body stays closer to wakefulness. In this way, fear didn't just shape behavior, it shaped the architecture of sleep itself. Rest but stay ready. This isn't how we picture prehistoric life. We often imagine them exhausted, passed out by the fire, but the truth is more delicate, more dynamic. Sleep was a rotating rhythm, a social pattern, a survival tactic, and like fire or tools or spears, it evolved with pressure. Every aspect of Paleolithic sleep, the broken phases, the shared watchfulness, the hyperresponsiveness, tells the same story. Sleep was earned, not assumed. Even today, under stress, we revert. We sleep lighter. We wake often. We check doors, listen for sounds, scan shadows. Our ancient alarm systems still hum in the background, waiting to activate. But that constant readiness came at a cost. Lack of deep sleep over long periods takes a toll on memory, on mood, on health. And yet humans survived, not because they overcame this fragility, but because they shared it. The tribe became the pillow. The group became the fortress. Where one slept, another listened. And that idea, that collective burden of safety, did more than just guard lives. It laid the groundwork for something else. Trust. Because to sleep in the Paleolithic was to trust your group, to believe someone would wake if you didn't, that the fire would be fed, that the cry in the dark would be answered. Sleep wasn't just biological, it was social, and perhaps spiritual. Which leads us into our next chapter, because some say that in the depths of sleep, in the rhythms of firelight and fear, something else awoke. Not the body, not the instincts, but imagination. The earliest dreams became stories. The flickers on cave walls became symbols. And out of sleepless nights, the first myths were born. Next, we enter the realm of cave art and spirit worlds, where the line between predator and god blurred, and survival gave rise to meaning. Before there were words, there were warnings. A rustle in the tall grass, a low growl echoing off the cave walls, a sharp inhale held just long enough for others to hear. In the world of our ancestors, silence was not golden. Silence was a lie. It was the moment before something terrible happened. And so they spoke, not in language as we know it, but in fear. Because long before we could say lion or run or danger, we could feel it. And feeling became signal. Survival didn't begin with vocabulary. It began with instinct shared. Imagine a small band of early Homo sapiens crouched beneath a rocky overhang in the dead of night. The fire has burned low. Smoke threads through the air. The wind shifts. Something stirs in the distance. No one speaks. Instead, someone grunts, a low, rhythmic sound halfway between breath and bark. Another reaches out and touches the arm of the person next to them. A hand points, not with the finger, but with the entire body, leaning, shifting, signaling. This wasn't primitive. It was precision under pressure. Researchers studying primate behavior, particularly among chimpanzees and bonobos, have shown us how complex fear-based communication can be. Chimps don't just scream when they're scared. They modulate their cries depending on what the threat is, how close it is, and whether others have noticed. They even exaggerate alarm calls if they think another group member hasn't seen the danger yet. Fear, in their world, is not just reflex. It's a message. And early humans were no different. In fact, the darkness may have accelerated the invention of language, not as a tool for storytelling, but as a mechanism of survival. The night demanded it. Because in the blackness of a Paleolithic forest, a single second could mean life or death, a delayed reaction, a misinterpreted movement. That's all it took. So we adapted, not by growing sharper claws or keener noses, but by refining the signals between us, turning fear into sound, panic into pattern. Some scientists believe that the roots of spoken language can be traced to what they call alarm vocalizations, brief, sharp, emotionally charged sounds used to warn of immediate threats. Among modern hunter-gatherers like the San of the Kalahari or the Ache of Paraguay, these warning systems still exist. Clicks of the tongue, whispers in the grass, whistles that blend into wind. But it wasn't just about noise. It was about nuance. A low hum to signal readiness, a soft hiss to indicate silence, the subtle shift in posture, the direction of the eyes, the twitch of a hand. In that world, gesture was grammar. The night became a theater of shadows, where the language of fear was played out in flickers and silhouettes. Firelight bouncing off cave walls wasn't just warmth, it was illumination for communication. The glowing edge of a torch became a pointer, a spotlight, a storyteller. Body language became amplified by the flame. And then something extraordinary happened. Humans began to mimic. Not each other, the predators. Imagine a young hominin mimicking the cough-like snarl of a cave hyena, not to entertain, but to warn, to say, "This is what I heard," or better yet, "This is what might be out there." It's speculative, yes, but this kind of mimicry still exists in tribal cultures today, and it exists in us. Children growl before they speak. They imitate danger before they describe it. Fear has always been the first teacher. And in groups, it becomes choreography. One calls, another responds, a third moves to the edge of the sleeping circle. There is no central command, no leader giving orders, just coordination through emotion, through a shared lexicon of tension, breath, posture, and voice. This was the seedbed of language, not abstract nouns, not poetry, but the immediate need to protect one another from what waited in the dark. And the dark never stopped waiting. Some anthropologists argue that the rhythm and musicality of early speech, its tone, pitch, cadence, were directly shaped by the acoustics of nighttime landscapes. Open plains required louder, sharper sounds. Dense forests called for soft clicks and low frequencies that wouldn't bounce off trees or alert predators. Language, in this view, was sculpted by the terrain of fear. And that brings us to something deeply profound. Language may not have evolved in spite of fear, but because of it. Not as a luxury, but as armor. Not as decoration, but as infrastructure. The night demanded that we find new ways to connect, to signal, to prepare each other. Every whisper was a bond. Every warning, a thread in the invisible web that kept the tribe alive. Even today, echoes of that urgency remain. We still whisper warnings. Our voices rise in pitch when we panic. We call out in our sleep. And in our earliest years, we learn to speak through emotion first, through cries, gasps, giggles, and clings, long before we ever form a sentence. Because at our core, communication is not about sharing ideas. It's about sharing vigilance. The night taught us that. And through that, something remarkable was born, not just language, but memory. Stories passed down, dangers described, patterns recognized. This is where the lion came from. This is how we stayed alive. Fear became history, and history became culture. Which leads us into our next chapter. Because once language took root, not just in cries but in stories, we began to leave marks, not just in sound but on stone. Up next, we follow that language into the walls of deep caves, into the heart of the earth, where humans first began to speak to the gods of the dark. In a world ruled by physical strength, where speed and endurance could mean the difference between life and death, it might seem strange to speak of the old as vital. They walked slower, their joints ached, their vision dimmed with dusk. In the frantic world of Paleolithic survival, it's easy to imagine them fading into the background, relics of an earlier season of life, now burdens on the tribe. But that assumption may be more modern than ancient, because new evidence suggests something deeply powerful, that elders, those gray-haired, stoop-backed survivors, weren't just tolerated in the prehistoric world. They were needed, especially at night. Let's step into a Paleolithic camp. The fire flickers low. The hunters sleep, breath heavy and limbs spent. Children curl in bundles of hides. The quiet has weight, thick, dark, watchful. And in the middle of it, someone stirs. It's not the strongest, not the swiftest. It's an elder, skin weathered like leather, eyes milky, movements slow but steady. They add another piece of dry brush to the fire. They adjust the coals, stir the embers. They hum something soft and cracked. They are not asleep, they are awake, and they're not alone. Recent anthropological studies, including groundbreaking work among the Hadza people of Tanzania, reveal something remarkable. In traditional hunter-gatherer societies, someone is almost always awake, and more often than not, it's the elders. Sleep scientists call it fragmented sleep, and while modern people treat it like a disorder in ancient life, it may have been a feature, not a flaw. As we age, our sleep changes. We wake more frequently, sleep less deeply, and rise earlier. But in a dangerous nighttime world, these disruptions became assets. The elders, unable to hunt, perhaps, became natural guardians of the flame. Literally, they were the ones who noticed when the fire dimmed, who knew how to keep the smoke from choking the cave, who stayed close to the children, who remembered the last time a leopard had crept too near and where the sentry should sit. But their power wasn't just in waking, it was in memory. Because while youth had the muscle to chase and climb, the elders had lived through nights the others hadn't. They'd seen the lion come too close. They felt the hunger of a bad season. They'd watched a child wander too far and not return. And so they told stories. Not fables, but warnings. Survival wrapped in myth. Instructions carried in rhythm and smoke. Around the fire, especially when the shadows were thick and the predators stirred in the brush, the old ones spoke. They told of the time the cave hyena came and no one was watching, of the scar still hidden beneath layers of bare fur, of the path to the hidden spring that never dries, even in winter. They spoke of gods, yes, but also of lessons. They were oral libraries in a world without writing. And to the young, their presence was grounding. A child waking to the sound of their grandmother's hum was reassured. A torch gently relit by a wrinkled hand was a quiet signal. We are still safe. The elders' calm in the face of darkness wasn't just soothing, it was strategic. Because panic is contagious, but so is presence. This concept, the elder as sentinel, reframes how we think about human society. It's not just about what you can do with your body. It's about what you can offer the group. And when the group's survival hinges on constant vigilance, there is no such thing as useless. Even among modern animals, we see echoes of this. In elephant herds, the oldest matriarch leads, not because she is strongest, but because she remembers. In wolf packs, older individuals help raise and teach the young, guiding them with patience learned through hardship. For ancient humans, this intergenerational dynamic wasn't cultural, it was evolutionary. In fact, some researchers believe that one of the reasons humans live so long past reproductive age, something almost no other mammals do, is because our elders gave our groups a survival advantage. It's called the grandmother hypothesis, and it suggests that the presence of older individuals, particularly women, allowed human infants to survive and thrive. When mothers were recovering, gathering, or resting, it was often grandmothers who provided care, food, and, at night, protection. Not through weapons, through awareness, through fire, through storytelling, through vigilance shaped by years of watching, listening, remembering. Even today, in the rhythms of our families, the echo remains. A grandfather who checks the door one last time before sleep. A grandmother who sits awake with a restless child. The sleeplessness of the old is not always a burden. Sometimes it is an inheritance. In a time before clocks, alarms, and motion sensor lights, it was the elder who watched the dark, who knew what fear felt like, but no longer let it own them, who made the fire not just burn, but mean something. They were more than keepers of flame. They were keepers of continuity. And their presence gave others permission to rest. Next, we descend deeper into that rest, not as weakness, but as strategy. Because in a world that never fully sleeps, even slumber itself became a communal design. Coming up, how prehistoric humans shared the night, not in silence but in ritual. The predators had not vanished. They still paced beyond the reach of firelight, eyes glinting in the black, breath steaming in the cold air. The wind still whispered through the branches like footsteps too near. But for a few hours at least, the circle around the fire felt safe. And into that safety, something ancient stirred. A voice. Low at first, gravel-thick and slow, like stone being shaped. A phrase, perhaps, or a sound, half word, half warning. A call to attention. The others turned. The fire popped. Sparks rose like stars. The voice continued. A story had begun. We often imagine storytelling as entertainment, something idle, a way to pass the time. But in the deep night of early human life, stories were not leisure. They were life. They were the mind's answer to the dark. And they were sacred. Across continents and millennia, one pattern repeats itself. When the fire burns, the stories begin. Whether in the limestone hollows of France, the brush shelters of Australia, or the riverbanks of the Americas, storytelling and fire are twin rituals. Not accidental, essential. Why? Because the human mind cannot sit quietly in uncertainty. When senses are dulled and threats lurk just outside reach, imagination fills the void. And in a world without certainty, imagination becomes the bridge to survival. Anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists now believe that many of our earliest myths were born from this need to explain the unknown. Why did the child disappear near the ravine? Why did the stars fall one night, or the mammoths vanish from the plains? It wasn't enough to say, "We don't know." The tribe had to know, or believe they did. And so came the spirits, the monsters, the warnings. Somewhere along the smoky walls of a firelit cave, an elder pointed to a shadow and said, "That's where the Night Stalker lives. He comes for those who wander from the fire." The children leaned closer. They believed. And in that belief they learned. Don't stray, stay close. Fire is safety, shadow is danger. It wasn't just a story. It was a lesson encoded in emotion. These early tales worked like ancestral software, passed from voice to voice, generation to generation, installing rules for survival in the minds of the young. Wrapped in metaphor, yes, but underneath lay strategy. What animals to fear? What paths not to walk? What time not to leave the cave? This is how culture begins. And around that fire, the human brain did something remarkable. It linked fear to memory, not as trauma, but as narrative. It gave emotion a shape and handed that shape to others. And in doing so, it formed one of the greatest tools of our species, shared internal worlds. By the firelight, the clan became more than just individuals. They became a we, bonded not just by blood or proximity, but by the same stories, the same ghosts, the same gods, and perhaps by the same monsters. We find this echo again and again in cave art. In France's Chauvet Cave, over 30,000 years ago, early humans painted lions, bears, rhinos, creatures of power, of danger. But not just depictions, some of them move. Not literally, of course, but in the flickering firelight, the overlapping lines and repeated limbs seem to animate. It's cinematic, intentional. Imagine sitting there, hearing a tale of a beast that comes from the mountains at dusk, and seeing across the stone wall that same beast move in the fire's shadow. This was not just communication, it was ritual theater, and it changed behavior. Because when fear is shared, it becomes instruction. And when that instruction is repeated across generations, it becomes belief. Some researchers suggest that the roots of religion, the very first expressions of spiritual thought, are buried in those firelight hours. Not in temples or scriptures, but in the quiet, spine-tingling hush when someone said, "Let me tell you what I heard in the dark." The belief in spirits, in ancestors, in forces unseen, all of it begins with trying to make sense of why the dark felt alive, why some people didn't return, why dreams carried meaning. Religion, in this view, isn't just metaphysical, it's adaptive. It binds the group. It justifies taboo. It rewards the cautious. If a myth says, "Don't go near the black cave on the hill," and the group survives by avoiding it, the story persists, and it gains power. And so, stories weren't just memories. They were strategic predictions disguised as myth. The snake in the tree became a whisper of poison. The crying woman in the forest became a tale to keep children close. The stars, those steady lights in the night sky, became signs, ancestors, watchers. And through it all, the campfire glowed like a portal to another world. 1 foot in safety, 1 foot in the unknown. Even today, that instinct lingers. We tell ghost stories around campfires. We whisper warnings at bedtime. Our brains still respond to myth in the same ancient rhythm: fear, image, emotion, memory. It is wired into us. Because in the age before cities, before walls, before metal and glass and sirens and street lamps, the only thing that stood between your clan and the wilderness was what you knew and what you believed. So they kept telling the stories. They passed them on across generations, across continents. And with each telling, those myths, those flickering dances of fear and wonder, wove a protective net over the sleeping minds of the tribe. A net made not of rope, but of meaning. And when the stories ended and the fire dropped low and sleep returned, the world was still dangerous, but it wasn't unknown. And that made all the difference. Next, we explore how one of the most powerful adaptations in the ancient night wasn't just physical or social, but emotional. Because when fear, vigilance, and myth were no longer enough, early humans turned to something even older: the silent, protective gaze of each other. Coming up, the rise of the night clan. The darkness never gave them mercy, so they learned not to ask for it. They didn't wait for teeth to tear through the shadows. They acted, silent, cunning, and deliberate. Because if the night was a predator's advantage, then humans would learn to even the odds. When most people think of cavemen, they imagine crude clubs, grunts, and aimless wandering. But that's a myth. Ironically, one born of the very storytelling we explored by the fire. In truth, early humans weren't just scared survivors. They were engineers of instinct, inventors born not in laboratories but in the crucible of fear. Let's go back 30,000 years into the past. The fire crackles in the heart of a cave. A mother clutches her child. Beyond the mouth of the shelter, something moves. Its subtle, grass pressed under a padded foot, a scent caught in the air. A lion, perhaps, or a hyena, maybe worse. The clan doesn't wait. A signal goes up, perhaps a hiss, a hand gesture. They activate the night's defenses. The first line, the terrain itself. We have evidence that early humans were remarkably selective about where they made their camps. Elevation wasn't just about visibility, it was a defense mechanism. Steep cliff faces meant predators had to approach from a limited direction. A narrow cave mouth, a bottleneck, easy to defend. In some sites, researchers have found natural choke points subtly reinforced with stone heaps, placed not randomly but as obstructions. These weren't walls. They were questions thrown into a predator's path. Will your paws be silent over this scree? Will you make noise if you cross this? And then came the tricks. Some campsites, like those studied in southern Africa and parts of Central Europe, show patterns of thorny plant remains gathered and deliberately arranged. It's not farming, it's barrier making. A primitive fence meant to keep four-legged hunters from slipping in unseen. The same tactic still used by Maasai herders today, a ring of acacia around a sleeping camp. Even more revealing are the bones. Scattered across some shelter entrances are long bones, intentionally snapped and arranged, crude perhaps but noisy underfoot. A cave lion wouldn't care, but a watcher would hear. These weren't traps to stop predators, they were alarms. Think of them as Paleolithic tripwires. And then there were the smells. It might sound strange, but human feces and urine, left in deliberate perimeter zones, may have served as scent-based deterrents. Many predators, including big cats and wolves, are sensitive to territorial markings. In modern times, zookeepers use predator urine to deter prey animals, and vice versa. Early humans may have used the same instinctual language. Their message was clear: this is ours, stay away. And if that didn't work, they had weapons waiting. Stone-tipped spears weren't just for the hunt. They were for defense, kept close at night. But more interesting are the throwing sticks, likely precursors to the boomerang and the boluses, weights on cords used to tangle legs. While full-scale boluses are hard to trace archaeologically, the principle of entanglement appears in multiple indigenous cultures across the globe, suggesting a deep-rooted shared logic. But what about traps? Pit traps, those dug into soft earth, covered with leaves, are older than civilization. While hard to prove without preserved structures, there are signs in sites like Schöningen in Germany and Kalambo Falls in Zambia of wooden stakes and dug features that hint at ambush points, possibly even predator-focused. These weren't just used to catch prey. They may have been proactive measures against intrusions. And here's something else: noise. In some Paleolithic shelters, objects resembling rudimentary rattles or percussion stones have been discovered. Some may have been used in rituals, but others, they might have been functional. When strung, hung, or placed near an entry point, these would rattle if disturbed. A kind of nighttime security system, not unlike wind chimes today. Again, the pattern repeats: detect, deter, defend. But perhaps the most powerful tool wasn't any one object. It was planning. Think about it, these strategies don't work spontaneously. They require foresight, the recognition that a night of peace might be followed by a night of attack. They require group cooperation, someone gathering thorns, someone laying the bones, someone watching to hear the rattle. This is technology not in the modern sense, but in its truest form, problem solving under pressure. And it shows us something remarkable, that even tens of thousands of years ago, before steel, before cities, before walls and watchtowers, humans were creating systems. They weren't just reacting to the world, they were designing it. Their traps, their tricks, their crude warnings, these were the ancestors of modern locks, fences, motion lights, and sirens. The same impulse, the same fear, the same defiance. You may be stronger, faster, deadlier, but I can outthink you. And that was the dawn of something new. Predators ruled the night with claws and teeth, but humans, we built our power in the mind. So when we look back now at those cave mouths, those circles of stone, those oddly placed sticks and bones, what we're seeing isn't just archaeology. We're seeing the first spark of a new kind of warfare. Warfare of wit. And it raises a deeper question. If early humans could learn to defend themselves this way in the dark, what else did they build from fear? Because fear wasn't just a danger, it was a forge. And what it shaped would go far beyond traps and alarms. In the next chapter, we leave the night behind and ask, what did all of this do to the human mind? How did fear, firelight, and shared survival shape the brain itself? Coming up, the neuroscience of ancient fear. The fire was supposed to be a shield, but sometimes the darkness came through anyway. We like to believe our ancestors always won, that with firelight, stone spears, and clever traps, they mastered the night. But the bones tell a different story, a quieter one without victors. Because not every story ended at dawn. Some ended with screams swallowed by cave walls, some with claw marks in stone, some with nothing but silence, and a shelter cold and abandoned, as if its occupants vanished mid-breath. Let's go to Go's Cave in what is now Somerset, England. 14,700 years ago, a group of people lived there, or tried to. The site shows evidence of daily life: butchered bones, fire pits, stone tools. But among these ordinary artifacts lie something far more disturbing. Human skulls, not buried, not honored. Modified, polished, shaped into bowls. There are signs, cut marks, percussion scars, that these weren't ritualistic trophies. They were functional, practical. Cannibalism. We don't know the full story. Starvation, war, fear turned inward. But what we do know is this: at some point the fire failed. Not just the literal flames, but the social fire, the emotional bond that holds a group together. Whatever the cause, the cave didn't protect them. It became a tomb. Then there's El Cedron in the limestone mountains of northern Spain. Deep inside the earth, researchers found the remains of 13 Neanderthals, men, women, children, all from the same extended family. They didn't die in peace. Many of the bones were cracked open, marrow extracted, teeth marks, not from predators but from each other. Another sign of a night that went wrong. Further east in Israel's Carmel Mountains, the Tabun cave holds a different kind of tragedy. Archaeologists there uncovered collapsed sediment layers, evidence of a sudden cave-in, possibly triggered by an earthquake. Buried beneath the rubble, partial human remains. There was no time to flee. The earth itself became the enemy. But perhaps the most haunting story comes from the burned layers of Abri Pataude in France. There, fire did more than fail. It turned against its makers. Charred remnants of animal bones, singed tools, even fragments of shelter walls suggest not a controlled hearth, but a blaze out of control, a desperate escape. Why would a Paleolithic shelter catch fire? A dropped ember, a predator driving them inward. Maybe the fire was set on purpose by rivals. Because not every threat came on four legs. Some came with human footprints. We tend to forget this, but for early humans, other humans were among the most dangerous things alive. In the Shanidar cave in Iraq, one Neanderthal skeleton tells a vivid story. Crushed ribs, a shattered skull, blows from a club or spear. Not by accident, not by fall, but by hand. Violence wasn't rare. It was part of the ecology. In sites across Europe, we find bones with embedded points, flint still wedged in vertebrae, pelvises pierced by sharpened shafts, defensive wounds across forearms. These aren't just injuries. They're encounters with someone who didn't come to talk. Some were raids. Others may have been retaliations. A nighttime attack didn't need an army. Just a few desperate figures slipping through shadows, past the perimeter stones, past the fading firelight, and into the sleeping bodies within. And then there are the empty shelters. Caves with clear signs of occupation, hearths, bedding depressions, tool clusters, abandoned in haste. No cleanup, no burial, just absence. One such site is in the Caucasus, Diza Zuana Cave. Layers of occupation, then nothing. A long pause, as if someone forced them out. These aren't myths. They're not metaphors. They're the scar tissue of prehistory. And they remind us of something sobering. That every trap we studied, every fire lit, every guard who stood in the dark existed because once it wasn't enough. These weren't precautions made in comfort. They were inventions born of failure. Every innovation was a reaction. Every tradition, a scar that learned how to speak. This is the humility of survival. That to endure, you must first lose. You must stumble, you must fear. And in that fear, find the strength to adapt. Because night didn't care if you were strong. It didn't care if you planned. It only asked one question: were you ready? And sometimes they were. But maybe that's why we are. Because in those moments, when the fire failed, when the cave collapsed, when teeth found flesh, we learned the most important lesson of all. Survival isn't guaranteed, it's earned. And it was in those failures, those disappearances, those desperate escapes into the unknown, that the next generation learned what not to do. They built stronger fires, laid smarter traps, watched longer. And the stories of those who didn't make it, they weren't forgotten. They were remembered in cautionary tales told by firelight, in the way a spear was always kept within arm's reach, in the instinct to wake at the faintest noise, in the collective memory of loss, because those who perished taught the rest how to live. And now, as we step into our final chapter, we ask the question their bones cannot answer. What became of the night? What did all this fear, all this invention, all this human defiance give rise to? Not just safety, not just survival, but civilization itself. Coming up, how the darkness that once hunted us became the place we dreamed, built, and created. The night transformed, and we were never the same. I asked ChatGPT. It began with silence, the kind that makes your skin pull tighter, that makes even the fire seem to shrink in its pit, the kind of silence that ancient humans knew not to trust. It is 42,000 years ago, somewhere between what is now southern France and the Italian Alps. The cave mouth is narrow, half choked by brush and rock, a deliberate barrier placed by calloused hands earlier that day. Inside, 23 people lie in the dark. They are not sleeping. The elder sits closest to the fire. Her name is unknown, lost to time, but we'll call her Amma. Her eyes are rimmed with smoke-etched lines, face carved by decades of weather and childbirth and grief. She feeds the fire slowly, piece by piece, careful not to let it flare too high. Firelight meant safety, but too much light meant visibility. Predators weren't the only ones who hunted at night. Other humans could follow the glow. She listens, not with ears alone, but with the tension of one who's learned the rhythm of the forest, the cave, the tribe's breathing. Something is wrong tonight. The birds stopped earlier than usual. The hyenas haven't cried. Behind her, a young boy stirs in his sleep. We'll call him Daru. He's 6 winters old. He sleeps in fragments, as all children in this world do, curled against his mother's ribcage, his face tucked beneath her fur-wrapped arm. His small hand grips a carved stone, a bear maybe, smoothed by worry and weather. Daru doesn't understand fear in the abstract, but his body knows. It curls tighter when the fire snaps. Near the cave mouth, just behind the shadow of a large boulder, a figure crouches. Kuro, tall, lean, his eyes wide in the dark. One arm bears the scars of a lion's swipe from a hunt 2 moons ago. His spear rests across his knees, one end burned black from fire hardening. He watches the forest. What little of it is visible beyond the tree line, beyond the fog. Something rustles. It's not much, just a soft shift, but Kuro hears it. The way an animal changes its breathing when it's about to leap. He doesn't call out. That would be wasteful. Instead, he lets out a click. 3 quick bursts, sharp, low in the throat. A signal, not taught with language but absorbed over years of living and surviving together. Inside, Amma hears it. She doesn't react outwardly. Instead, she passes the firewood to her daughter, Daru's mother, and walks toward the deeper part of the cave, where the tribe's tools are stacked and sleeping infants rest in bark-lined nests. She wakes To, the eldest boy, 14, nearly a man, already fierce, already afraid. Meanwhile, Kuro doesn't move, doesn't blink. He knows better than to face the dark with bravado. He listens. Then movement. Not 1, 3. He feels it before he sees it shapes between the trees, low and fast, too fast for hyenas, not the loping gait of wolves. These are upright, human. Raiders. The cave was scouted. That much is clear. The fire wasn't too high, but the scent, the smoke carries. And tonight it carried too far. Kuro shifts his weight, ready to rise. He doesn't need to look back. He knows Amma will have woken them, knows that Toe will be handing out the spare spears, the rock clubs, the flint blades kept wrapped in mammoth hide. Inside the cave, the children have gone still. Daru is no longer asleep. His mother presses his head against her chest, whispering something old and soft in a tongue we'll never translate. A story, a prayer, maybe both. Amma takes her place by the wall where the firelight meets shadow, just bright enough to see, just dark enough to disappear. She holds a branch torch unlit, waiting. The raiders come. They do not roar or scream. This is not the violence of chaos. This is the silence of hunger, of desperate, coordinated men who have followed scent and shadow through freezing night for a chance at food or fire or revenge. But the tribe is ready. Kuro gives a low snarl, animal and deep, the kind of sound that turns a predator's instincts against itself. He lunges forward, not at the man, but at the brush pile near the cave. With a thrust, he drives his spear into it and sets it ablaze. The brush explodes in light. Smoke and sparks rise like a god's breath. One raider screams, caught in the flash, his night vision destroyed. From the cave, Amma lights the torch. Toe and the others appear in the entryway, weapons in hand, fire behind them. It is not a fortress, but it is enough. The raiders hesitate. Fire, numbers, readiness. The element of surprise is gone. In this world, hesitation is defeat. They vanish back into the woods, not defeated, just denied. Silence returns, but this time it is chosen. Inside the cave, the fire burns higher now. They will not sleep for hours. They will keep watch, tell the story, refill the traps, sharpen the spears. Daru holds his bear tighter. His mother sings now, not loud but enough. Amma sits, breath steady. She doesn't speak, but she closes her eyes for a moment, not in sleep, in memory. Because this night wasn't the first, and it will not be the last. But something did change. Not in the fire, not in the cave. In them. They survived, not by hiding, not by luck, but by adapting together. This was the night they passed a silent law down the generations. We will be ready. And it is this memory, not the words, but the pattern of watching, guarding, and standing between the dark and the children, that ripples forward. Into villages, into cities, into porch lights and midnight lullabies. Into every night someone checks the door twice, or listens for a distant sound and feels that ancient tension coil in the chest. The fear never left, but neither did the fire. And because of nights like this one, we are still here. As the embers crackle and dawn creeps over the hills, a new world begins to glow. Civilization doesn't start in daylight. It begins here in the dark, when we choose not just to survive, but to protect. And in the next chapter, We'll see how this vigilance gave rise to the first foundations of safety, structure, and society. I asked ChatGPT, look around your bedroom tonight. The faint glow from your phone, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room, a locked door, a light switch that, with the flick of a finger, turns night into day. And yet you check the windows before sleep. You might keep a flashlight on your nightstand. You pause at a sound in the hallway, even if it's just the pipes shifting in the walls. Some part of you still listens. Some part of you still remembers. Because the instincts you feel when the lights go out, the need to secure, to huddle close, to leave a nightlight on for the children, aren't quirks of modern anxiety. They're echoes, genetic shadows, the long, unbroken memory of danger in the dark. You are the result of a million successful nights, a million watchful eyes, a million careful fires. And long before locks and lamps and police patrols, there were only those eyes, that fire, and the fragile, pulsing hope that the night would end with everyone still breathing. We are not just descendants of cavemen. We are descendants of night survivors. When we first wielded fire, we did more than light the dark. We drew a line between chaos and control. Fire became our first tool of civilization, not just survival. Around it, we gathered. We told stories. We mourned the dead. We taught the young. The flames didn't just keep the predators away. They gave us identity. They gave us memory. Every flicker cast shadows on cave walls, and those shadows became myths, fears, gods. Around those embers, language evolved. Culture emerged. Strategy, empathy, duty, all of them sharpened under the pressure of the dark. And every structure we live in now, from apartment towers to country homes, is still shaped, at its deepest level, by the question, will this keep me safe tonight? Our walls are echoes of cave mouths. Our porch lights, the sparks of ancient torches. Our alarm systems, the modern drums of the night watch. We still sleep with the tribe close, whether that's family in the next room or a phone that keeps us tethered to others. Fear didn't just haunt our ancestors, it forged them. It forced us to plan, to protect, to pass on what we learned. And in doing so, fear shaped our intelligence, our cooperation, our civilization. We're told today that fear is weakness, that it should be erased, controlled, ignored. But that's a mistake. Because fear kept the first humans alive through 10,000 cold nights. It taught them to read tracks in the dirt, to sleep in shifts, to listen not just with their ears but with their bodies. Fear isn't just panic, it's information. And when fear is shared, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes responsibility. It becomes community. It becomes civilization. Every guard who stayed awake beside a glowing fire, every elder who sang stories to a sleepless child, every parent who wrapped their arms around the next generation to shield them from what howled in the dark. They were all building something larger than themselves. A structure made of trust, of memory, of firelight. And now, when we write laws, build borders, hold night vigils, or tuck a child in, we are continuing a project that started before language, before stone tools, before maps. We are still answering the same question. Will we make it through the night? The difference now is we're no longer just hopping. We expect to survive. We have inherited that right through every vigil kept, every trap laid, every myth whispered into darkness. So the next time you find yourself lighting a candle in a blackout, or waking suddenly from a sound you can't quite name, remember this. That reaction is older than you, older than civilization, older than the names we give ourselves. It's the voice of the tribe. It's the flame that stayed lit. It's the reminder that no matter how far we've come, from caves to cities, from spears to satellites, we are still shaped by the night. But we are no longer afraid of it, because we are the fire. And that fire has never gone out.